If you're just starting out in painting, or even if you've been doing it for some time, you might have some questions about which brushes are best to pick.
We'll do that by covering brush basics, fibers, and shapes.
Let's go. First, some basic terminology to help you talk about brushes. Brushes are made up of three parts: the tuft, the ferrule, and the handle. The tuft is the collection of bristles at the top of the brush head. We're going to talk a lot about the shape of different tufts in a few moments. The ferrule, or the metal part, simply has the function of holding the tuft and the handle together. And the handle, of course, is self-evident. It's the thing you hold on to. One thing you should note about the handle is that they come in different shapes and sizes. So do test them out at the art store and find one that feels right in your hand. Before we talk about the type of brush you want, let's talk about the type of brush you need. The rule to remember is the lower the numbered brush, the smaller it is. Very large brushes would be numbered 20 or higher. You'll want to use a very large brush if you're doing work that you have to cover a lot of ground, like painting a background or painting an abstract or painting very loosely. We would say a very small brush is probably numbered 2 or smaller, and those are really handy for detailed work. One thing to keep in mind here is that size 1 is not the smallest brush. There's a 0, a double 0, a triple 0, all the way to 20 zeros. That's really small. Natural fibers versus synthetic fibers. Okay, let's talk about when to use a brush with natural fibers and when to use one with synthetic fibers. Natural fiber hairs are made from animals like camels, oxen, mink, squirrels, sable, and others. Brushes made with natural fibers tend to be very soft, and those make them great choices for blending with oil paint, or if you're a watercolor painter, they're really great for holding water. The only animal hair fiber or natural fiber that's known not for its softness, but rather the opposite, for its stiffness, is the hog's hair brush. Like the hog's hair brush, synthetic brushes are also quite stiff. You'll want to use synthetic brushes if you don't mind showing your brush strokes in your paintings, or if you're not too worried about blending, or also if you're just trying to keep your costs down. Now let's focus in on the tuft exclusively and talk about brush shapes. The first brush I want to talk about is the round brush. The bristles on the round brush all meet at a certain point and are usually medium to long in length. Round brushes are used primarily for details, and that's because all the bristles come together at a point, allowing for a very controlled application of paint. You'll find round brushes in almost every paint set, but it's not quite as versatile as it's made out to be. In fact, it's not very versatile at all. But speaking of versatile, that brings me to my next brush, the flat brush. No surprise here, the flat brush has a flat top. It also has long bristles. You'll hear some artists referring to a flat brush as a square brush. It's the same thing. Unlike round brushes, flat brushes are actually pretty versatile. They allow for broad flat strokes and also small lines. The next brush I'd like to talk about is the bright brush. A lot of artists mistake the bright brush for a flat brush. The difference here is not in the top of the brush, but rather in the length of the bristle. A bright brush has very short bristles. Those short bristles mean that the brushes are usually quite stiff. That allows for the paint to be moved in a certain way. That way is best suited for thick paint. So if you paint in pasto, using a bright brush might be best for you. The next brush is a filbert brush. A filbert brush is a kind of a cross between a round brush and a flat brush. It looks like a flat brush, but it's slightly rounded on the top, kind of a dome shape. Now, the filbert brush is a great all-arounder, but it can't do any one thing extremely well. I would say the only real weakness a filbert brush has is in painting lines, but it is an excellent brush at blending. And the next brush is the angled brush. The angled brush is basically the opposite of a filbert brush. It's quite bad at blending, but it is excellent at line work. The top of the angled brush, as the name implies, is angled. Other than line work, you're probably going to use your angled brush for other little details. The penultimate brush I want to talk about today is the fan brush. As a painter who typically likes a lot of control in his work, I'm no fan of the fan brush. The fan brush gives you a chaotic stroke. If irregularity is something you're looking for in your art, maybe you want to paint leaves on a tree, that kind of thing, then the fan brush really will come in handy. The thing you want to think about with a fan brush is random lines and chaotic lines. And one note, if you do get a fan brush, you have to take very good care of it because they lose their shape quite quickly. And finally, the last major brush type I'd like to talk about is the liner. The liner is used exclusively for detailed work. You use it and hold it much more like a pencil than a paintbrush. It's characterized by very short bristles. Sometimes they can be long bristles, but it's basically a very, very small round brush. There you have it. There are, of course, other brush types, but we've covered the main ones. You should be able to pick the ones you need for the paintings that you want to make. And just remember, when it comes to painting, there are no rules. There are only guidelines. Pick the brushes that look fun to you, give them a try, and have fun creating.